My name's Sarah Tregenza, and I'm the Asia Pacific Oncology Medical Affairs Director at Pierre Fabre. I have the privilege of working with a wonderful and diverse team across the Asia Pacific region, and I'm really passionate about culture, which is why I wanted to talk to you a little bit on this topic today. So a few disclaimers. I think this one is pretty standard. And the next one, I just wanted to acknowledge culture is a huge topic, and I can't pretend to go into any real depth in 20 minutes, but I want to just highlight what I'm going to say are 3 keys to building positive culture, and I hope then you can take that, and if you want to look into those 3 keys further, you will then be able to. And I've got a link to my slides at the end so you don't have to take photos. So I want to get everyone to close your eyes. I'm watching you, close your eyes. And I want you to think about a time where you did some of your best work. You broke through a pre-existing barrier, you achieved something great, and it really had meaning to you. So I'm hoping you've all got something. And I want you to think about the group, the company, the team that you're working with at that time now. Okay, hopefully you've all got that group. And I want you to think about how it felt and what the culture was like in that team. Okay, I'm hoping everyone's got something. You can open your eyes now. So I'm going to take a stab in the dark or a guess that when you did that work, you felt excited, empowered, supported, encouraged, that you had a clear vision or mission in mind that you were given, that you're working towards, and that you were able to use your skills to do that work. And I want you to nod if any of that resonated. Okay, good. So what I think we can see here is we all have this universal sense of how we want to feel at work and what good culture feels like, and that enables us to do that great work that I got you just to think about. And yet we know culture is not always so great in Australian pharma. And I've just pulled some articles here from Pharma in Focus from July. And then more recently, you can see some articles in September and even this month. So I'm hoping I don't have to convince people of this, but I thought I would just also highlight the financial or the business impacts of positive culture. So this is a study by Harvard which surveyed 200 companies, and what they found is that companies that focused on shaping and investing in culture significantly outperformed companies that didn't, and you can see the figures there, quite significant. This is another report by the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors and the Australian Institute of Company Directors. And the ASX 50 company directors unanimously agreed that culture was critical to the performance of their companies. This is another one by Gallup, which shows that they surveyed 4 million employees, and they found that those companies that were in the top quartile in terms of employee engagement performed 22% better in profitability. And finally, Great Place to Work has shown that the 100 best companies to work for in the US consistently outperform the market. The S&P 500 showed an annual growth rate of around 6% from 1997 to 2013, whilst the 100 best showed an annual stock market return of almost double that at 11%. Right, so you've seen the business impact, you know how you want to feel when you do your best work. So what exactly is culture? There's heaps of definitions, but I really like this one because it's the unspokenness, it's the unspoken things, it's the way things are done around here. So we can have all these mission statements and values and behaviours on our website, but are we walking the talk, as people say? It's actually what people are doing. That is the culture. And I want to give you a little personal example of where this played out in my own life. So a little bit embarrassing. This is me. I was kind of like a female version of Ronald Weasley, but the personality was more Hermione Granger. And so I was quite academic, and I went to an academic school. This is 2008 at Monash Research Institute. And so I continued academically and reading books and cell culturing and things like that. And then 2 years after my PhD, I made the leap into pharma. And I'm also married to a research engineer, might I add. So we were all hanging out in this blue zone over here. And when I entered pharma, it was a huge culture shock for me because really, based on my career and background and my life partner, it was the first time I'd really been exposed to such a diverse group of personality styles. You know, the logical, analytical, which I was used to, wasn't always the case. And I want to give an example of when we're at a function and I'd gone out with a group of colleagues and friends from the company and we were ordering dinner and drinks, and then I was looking back to the SOP and I'm like, oh, this is going a bit over. And they just looked at me and they're like, Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. And then they proceeded to tell me how we can get around that particular SOP. And I'm not going to share that with you, but that's what I'm saying about the way things are done around here. Like, you can't prescribe it with an SOP. People will find ways around it. So I want to give you the 3 keys now. So the first key is to create and operate around principles. And I want to tell you another story to illustrate this point. So this is a story from Johnson & Johnson, and their founder had a 36-page document, which was almost biblical. They referenced it, they had it at the wall of all their company offices, and it was called the Credo. And essentially, it was a document that outlined what the company stood for, what its values were, and this is an excerpt here. So, the CEO at the time in 1976 was James Burke, and he realised this was on all the walls at all the offices, but no one had really read it recently. He didn't know if it still had a place and if it stood. So to their great disgruntlement, because everyone was busy doing the work, he got a group of the senior leaders together. He asked them all to read and analyse the 36 pages, and he wanted to bring them all together to check if it was still relevant. And what ensued was a day of heavy debate where they all went over every single section. You know, can they still be successful financially if they operate around these principles? And at the end of the day, they all unanimously agreed this is still relevant and we want to stick by this, and this is important for the success of our company. And that was the end of that. So they stuck with it. And then what happened was 7 years later, J&J was hit with one of the biggest scandals of the time. And what happened was 6 people died, and J&J was informed that it was because they had taken their product, high-strength Tylenol, which someone had intentionally laced with cyanide. And the day after they found this out, the next day there was 1 more death. So the total was 7. And it was predicted at the time that this received as much media coverage as the Kennedy shooting, so it was massive. And advertising experts said J&J will never sell another product under this brand name again. And James Burke flew to Washington with his team 3 days after the scandal broke, and he met with the FDA and the FBI, and they said, look, the cost and the hassle, we recommend you just recall the products from Chicago because all the deaths had been in Chicago. And so he said, just recall the products in Chicago. It'll be, easier, quicker, expensive. We don't think there's a risk beyond that. And James Burke flew back from that meeting, and he did not listen to the FBI or the FDA. He chose to withdraw all the Tylenol products everywhere. And this cost the company $100 million. It was 31 million packs, and $100 million. And when asked why he did that, he said, I'm not so good at the reverse. He went back to the Credo, and he said, because our responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, patients, mothers and fathers, and everyone who uses our products and service. And we have to ensure their safety. And they deployed 200 representatives of the company who went and visited all the doctors, nurses and patients to check how they were doing, if everything was okay, if there'd been any issues. They also then proceeded to innovate and produce the first tamper-proof packaging at the time so that this would never happen again. And within 6 weeks, they had that new packaging available on the market. And very surprisingly, although their market share had dropped with the scandal, people then noticed it began to climb. James Burke had been doing the media rounds to the great fear of his legal department, telling everyone what they were doing and how sorry they were. And the market share began to climb, and not only did it reach the previous levels, surprisingly, it actually exceeded them. So that's a great example I wanted to share with you about creating principles that you operate by and the actual part of operating by those principles. The next key I want to talk about is safety, and I'm going to do this by talking about the brain. So this is the triune model of the brain, which proposes that the brain evolved in 3 parts in an evolutionary perspective, beginning with the reptilian brain or the brainstem, which is responsible for the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and reproduction. And thank you. And the middle part is responsible for emotional regulation. And so these, from an evolutionary perspective, are required for us to survive, and the emotion heightens our response. If anything's threatening our survival, if we need to run, it gets us activated. And then the third one is the neocortex. So this is where you get your higher order, higher level thinking, where you're going to be able to solve complex problems. So we want everyone to be operating in the higher level neocortex. But the way the brain works is when we're triggered with any of our safety or emotions here, it hijacks our whole brain, and we can't use our clever brain, the one that we need to do that great work. So another way of looking at it is, from an evolutionary perspective, I hope we're all very safe physically in our workplaces today, but our brain hasn't evolved at pace of our environment, and it doesn't know that. So to fit in socially was critical to our survival back in our ancestry days, and so our brains are still, our unconscious brains are still obsessed with ensuring and monitoring psychological safety. And I want to say that one more time so it sinks in. Our unconscious brains are still obsessed with ensuring psychological and social safety. So I want to give you another example of how this can play out in real life. So this was an experiment done by someone called Peter Skillman, where he got teams together, he gave them these items here, and he asked them to build the highest tower. And the only trick was they had to have the marshmallow on the top. And to do this, he got 2 groups to do this task. Now, put your hand up if you think the business school graduates won this competition. Okay, you're all very smart. Okay. So I don't need to put your hand up if you think the kindergartners won. Yeah, you're correct. So in dozens of trials, kindergartners built structures that averaged 26 inches tall, whilst business school graduates averaged less than 10 inches tall. And do we have any general managers still in the room? No? Okay, I thought they would like this one because you guys got the closest to the kindergartners. So the lawyers did a bit better than the business school graduates, but the CEOs of companies here, we do. So you guys got the closest, so well done. But what was happening here is the business school graduates got together and hypothesised and made a plan and then, started the plan and then did it, whereas the kindergartners just got stuck into it. They interrupted each other, they grabbed things, they tried things. And psychologists would say that the business school graduates were engaging in a process called status management. So they were like, who's the leader here? Should I interrupt that person? What if someone thinks my idea is really dumb? And so they were so preoccupied with that psychological safety that they don't perform as well in the task. And as I said, it's too short a time to go into great detail in this. There are heaps of resources on how you can create psychological safety. I read this book, The Culture Code, which I really loved and has a lot of practical examples. But it's about small cues. These look really small, but small and regular cues, because it's also not something, it's something we have to constantly attend to, psychological safety. So I want to move on to my last key, which is get and maintain the right people. And I'm going to start by talking about this book here by Jim Collins. Maybe some of you have read it. For those that haven't, I think it was about a 4-year research project he did. And he was looking at companies which significantly outperformed the average market over a 15-year period. 15 years because he didn't want it to just be one lucky break or one lucky product, and he also didn't want it to be tied to a particular leader. So 15 years he thought would eradicate those variables. And what he did is he wanted to look at what was unique about those companies, the good to great companies. And he came up with this model here, and I don't want to lose you in this, and I can't talk about all of this, but in terms of culture, this first principle or character trait he found about these companies is they had a particular type of leader, and they also put a huge focus on employing the right people. So a bit about level 5 leaders. Level 5 leaders quite often came internally from the company. Competitor companies often would go for someone who was very charismatic or a famous leader, bring someone in externally. 9 out of the 11 companies had an internal person. They were not a celebrity status type of person. They were humble, but their humbleness was not to be mistaken. They were strong-willed and ambitious also, these level 5 leaders. But their ambition was for the company and not for themselves. It was around those values and principles that we talked about in Key 1. And the first who, then what, is describing the type of people they employed. So the level 5 leaders were humble and they didn't pretend to know all the solutions to all the problems. So rather than what the comparator companies did, which was a model known at the time as a genius with 1,000 helpers, where there was one leader who would dictate and tell everyone what to do, these companies would hire the brightest people in their areas and they would listen to those people. And they figured, I'm not going to write a strategy then hire people to execute. I'm going to hire the best people in each of the fields I need to solve these problems, and I'm going to listen to them and build the strategy with them. So that was the first who, then what. And I think that's really the end of the 3 keys that I wanted to focus on today. These are some of the books that I used to bring some of the content to you. And here you can scan the slide here to download the slides. Thank you very much.